Be pretty thirsty. It's great to be speaking to you again. Please keep that passage open as we look at it and think about all that's going on with Jesus here. Do you ever wonder what Jesus is up to? As you read in the Gospels and see some of the different things that he said and did, do you ever find some of the things he did a little confusing? Maybe he's giving kind of mixed signals at times, or is that just me? I don't know. Sometimes you look and you wonder. And you can only imagine at times how it would have been for the first disciples, can't you? They were really at times quite wrong-footed by him. Things like the TV series The Chosen try and bring that out pretty well, don't they? As they try to grapple with what is he doing. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is that a lot of the time when Jesus catches you off guard or says or does something that seems a little bit odd, it is completely intentional. It is completely intentional. It is intended to make people go, what's happening? What's going on? And so they will draw in and listen and grow. So if you're ever reading or listening to something about Jesus and you feel that, allow yourself the time to think, what's going on here? Why is he doing that? And open your spiritual eyes and ears, because you can know one thing with Jesus, that there will be a reason. None of this stuff is accidental. And so as we're reading Luke 19 this morning, don't be thinking, he was obviously just tired, and so he decided to ride a donkey, he just borrowed a donkey. Or he got out of bed the wrong side, he was having a bad day, and so he just lost it with the money changers. Okay? None of it is like that. It is completely deliberate, and it is designed to communicate. And so one of the questions, therefore, as we work through this, is really, are we listening? If he's doing things to communicate, we have to ask the question, are we listening to what he is communicating? As we look in these verses, we're going to see how this person is a king who comes in humility, knowing that we need God's presence in our lives. He's coming in humility. He's a king coming in humility, knowing we need God's presence in our lives. And we're going to think about that in sections as we go through. So first, this is a king. The whole thing as he enters Jerusalem is clearly very king-like, isn't it? People shouting, a great procession. But I want us to notice how, as it unfolds, his kingship shows itself in another way as well, because it isn't just in terms of what it looks like, the display. It's also the fact that he is in complete control of what is going on, and he is orchestrating the whole thing. Because, Jesus has been working his way to Jerusalem for a long time now. In Luke's gospel, it's been going since the end of chapter 9. He's walked about 90 miles by this point. He's going from one place to another, stopping in different places, preaching and teaching in the synagogues, healing people, and doing these various miracles. And now, with a few miles to go, he wants to ride a colt, a young donkey. And it's not because he's tired, all right? Again, it's not because he's tired. He's orchestrating and communicating things. And here's how some of that is working, right? First of all, there's the timing. It is the Passover festival just coming very, very soon. And he is timing his arrival to Jerusalem to coincide with that. It's a highly charged time where worshippers would be coming from all over the place, so that the city of Jerusalem, which normally would have, they think, had a population of around 50,000 people, would have received at least 150,000 visitors for this time there. So that's quite a big thing, something even more. So if you imagine, I don't know, sort of a place 4 times the size of Alice Street maybe is roughly what Jerusalem normally was. And then when everybody's in town, it's like the size of the whole city of Derby, all gathered together. The guest houses would be full, a kind of pop-up community of tents appeared around the outside, around the hillside, around the city walls. And it's a real time of excitement, and also of national remembrance of God's acts in their history as they're thinking back to what we have in the book of Exodus, where they're set free from their oppressors. It's quite relevant to their moment too, isn't it? Their Egyptian oppressors, through the blood of the Lamb. That's what they're remembering. And so Jesus' timing here is not a coincidence. It's very loaded. The colt also is not a coincidence. So using a donkey. The use of the donkey in and of itself is a claim to Jesus' identity. It's a messianic claim because, it's kind of like the way that songwriters or poets might echo a phrase or part of a melody to try and get people to recall something and remember another thing and kind of riff on it. And it's like Jesus is kind of riffing on a theme here. For those who knew the Old Testament writings, they would have heard it loud and clear. Because in the Old Testament, there was the way that a couple of kings used donkeys. King David had ridden a donkey in 2 Samuel 16. Solomon rode one to his coronation in 1 Kings 1:33. And then it goes further as well, because the whole donkey riding motif carries on in Zechariah, where Jesus is very clearly, intentionally trying to fulfill a prophecy, which Matthew quotes directly, but Luke clearly has it in mind too, from Zechariah 9, verse 9, where it says, "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of the donkey." So through the colt, Jesus is staking a claim to be God's Messiah king. He's acting and communicating. He's raising the stakes. And then there's the crowd as well, because it seems pretty clear he's even managing that. Sometimes, I guess we kind of imagine that, Jesus was just coming into town, and all these people just suddenly appeared, and he was kind of like, oh, that's so nice, thank you, you're too kind. But when you think about it, that's not really how it worked. He sends his followers to find the colt in Bethany and Bethphage. And Bethany is the place where, you might remember, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, they all live. It's a place where Jesus spent quite a lot of time. And if ever there was a place that knew about the power of Jesus, surely it was Bethany in the areas around, because what did Jesus do for Lazarus? Lazarus, not that long before this. He brought him back to life, hadn't he? They loved Jesus in this place. If ever there was a place that was sold out on Jesus as the Lord, it was there. And so when Jesus sends ahead for the colt, some people think maybe he kind of prearranged it. Well, maybe it doesn't really say so. But, given that it was a place where he was known and that was excited about him, if you send your guys ahead in verse 30 and 31 to say, can we borrow this unridden colt? The Lord needs it. They're going to be thinking, yes, take it. Maybe Zechariah 9 kind of flashing through their minds. They're thinking, this is game on. And they're surely part of the initial crowd that then go with him. So people suggest, he was as much sending for the crowd as he was sending for a donkey. And they come and they join the excitement of the procession. They're putting their cloaks onto the colt. They're putting their cloaks onto the road, creating a kind of red carpet. The palm branches aren't actually mentioned in Luke in this passage. They're in the other Gospels. But, Cloak Sunday doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it? So we're sticking with Palm Sunday. But all of it, right, is a response to a king. Psalm 118 is in the soundtrack, traditional Passover song, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And Jesus is doing this on purpose in a highly charged festival week, setting up the confrontation that must come. He knows it must come. He is precipitating a crisis. They have to act now. What he's doing is unmistakable. He's raising the stakes. They want to kill him already, but he's managing the timetable. And so when the Pharisees get in there, they recognize the claim to the messianic identity. They tell Jesus, don't they, in verse 39, basically to get a grip on his followers. But he stokes it up even more by saying, what? In verse 40, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." In other words, you really have no idea what's going on here, do you? If I manage to silence the people, if we gagged them and got rid of them somehow, he's saying the very fabric of this planet would start to cry out. Because what is going on is so momentous that creation itself can see it, even if you can't. The very rocks under your feet know that their creator is in town. This is a king, a ruler, a leader. But they don't like it. And let's be honest, sometimes neither do we. Because one of the realities of humanity is that we don't like being told what to do. Is that not right? And it's not just children and teenagers who struggle with it. Newsflash, it's true for most adults as well. We naturally resist someone telling us what to do. This is the human condition, really, isn't it? You think, even back to the beginning, the account of the Garden of Eden. Has God really said? Is that really true? Not eating from the trees? Will it really harm you? Does God know best? Couldn't you make better decisions yourself? Wouldn't you like to be like God? Wouldn't you like to be the one calling the shots? And we think, I can do it. I am the master of my soul. I am the captain of my fate. Or is it the other way around? I did it my way. And these various anthems of our lives. We think we can operate independently from the one who made us and knows us and has crafted us, wired us, and who loves us. We think that we can live independently from him and live successfully in his world without him, but we can't. Just look at the news. Look around. Look within. We need him. We need our King and our Maker. And the stones, the rocks of the earth know it. But here's the second thing. Because there's something a bit different about this king. This is a king who comes in humility. Because what's with the donkey? Where's the war horse? Isn't there something more impressive he could ride? Was it just that he couldn't find one? But if we go back to the Old Testament prophecy again from Zechariah 9, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion, shout, daughter Jerusalem, see your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey, proclaiming peace. His rule will extend from sea to sea. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, one of the reasons that we kick against submitting to a king is that we resist being told what to do. That's part of it. But more legitimately, it is also true that we are wary of absolute power in our world, aren't we? Because it is normally abused. It is not normally something good. Without the checks and the balances that sinful human beings need when they wield power, the news again shows us that. History shows us that. A number of the friends that we work with who are refugees talk plainly about how political power in their country is basically a means to get rich. Even in places where it's not a dictatorship, people invariably leave office having filled some foreign bank account with a lot of money and bought various homes in different cities of the world. It's pretty self-serving. I think it was one of Marcus's sessions at the Church Away Day where he said that often in our world, the point of power is to have control and serve yourself and squash others. But this king is different because he's humble, he's lowly, and righteous. You see that? He's good. And there's all the difference in the world between that and corrupt, self-serving leadership so often found in our world. Submitting ourselves and bowing down to, acknowledging the leadership of a king who is perfectly good and kind, righteous, who cares deeply for you, as you said before, knows how we're wired, wants the best for you, wants you to flourish, knows how you will flourish, and has come to serve you so that you might find freedom and forgiveness and life through his death that is shortly going to come. That is so different. And that is something that you can submit to with confidence. Because we know this king is good, he understands the bigger picture and the fine detail in ways that we can then have confidence in. And he does this because he knows what we need. He knows what we need. And that's where the third thing comes in. Because the third thing is that this is a king who comes in humility, knowing we need God's presence in our lives. He knows we need God's presence. And that's really what we see from verse 41 down on through to the end of the chapter. Because what's happening with Jerusalem here? As Jesus is approaching the city, he sees it, and he is heartbroken as he looks at it. It's Jerusalem, the historic heart of the people of God, but it's in a mess. It's under the control of a powerful and ruthless group of men, a group of religious leaders, not the Pharisees now, these are a different group, these are the Sadducees, these are the high priests, these are the rulers, Annas and his 5 sons and his son-in-law Caiaphas, who had all at various points been the high priest, would pass it round between them. They are the powerful aristocratic family who've got their fingers in all the religious and political and business life of the city, such that one writer calls them the Jerusalem Mafia. It is corrupt and self-serving. And Jesus is looking at Jerusalem and all of the history of God's people and their history of unfaithfulness and failure to listen to the prophets who would come and to pursue God with integrity. It's all about to come to a head in the rejection and betrayal of the Son of God. And Jesus, who loves these people, is very emotional about that, because they are persisting in a self-destructive pattern of behavior, and they will not listen. So verse 44, he says, "You did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." The Messiah had come, the one carrying God's presence, God himself in skin. But they would not recognize him. And so Jesus saw not just the city on the hill there in that moment, but he foresaw the unfolding future as that self-destructive behavior would continue and lead 40 years later to its complete destruction. As in AD 70, a group of Jews attempted to overthrow the Roman rule and were crushed by Titus after the siege of Jerusalem. And there were crucifixions, thousands, it was said, around the outside of the city walls, and the temple was completely demolished. But you see what it was that they missed? What Jesus said it was that they needed, verse 44 again, it was that they needed God coming to them. God was coming to them. God with us. You remember all of that? Bit of a Christmas theme. But actually, it's the theme of the whole Bible. God coming to us, dwelling with us, God's presence. And that's what the temple thing is about as well in verse 45 and following. Because this is all about Jesus wanting God's presence to be known and experienced. That's what the temple was for. It was the place where, and one way of describing it is the place where heaven and earth kind of overlapped. So think of it maybe as 2 dimensions. You've got our dimension, the world we live in, and then there's where God dwells in heaven. And it's like where they overlap and intersect is the temple, hence the Holy of Holies, where God was, where he dwelt. And they had to approach with all the right kind of reverence. Now, it's a little bit complicated because it was all kind of going to change, hence Jesus talking about himself as well as the temple in John chapter 2. And the Spirit of the risen Jesus living in us as his people is also described as a temple of the Holy Spirit in 1 Corinthians 3 and Ephesians 2. But the point is, whether we're talking about the Old Testament temple or the incarnate Jesus or his Spirit in his people, it's the same issue. God comes to us and he wants to dwell with us. He wants us to know him, for us to experience his presence. And so here in Luke 19, the temple, the place which was supposed to be where people could meet God and know him, find forgiveness, find life, it was corrupted. Terribly corrupted. It wasn't that there was a problem as such with having money changers and places to buy animals. I mean, you needed that. If you're one of those coming to Jerusalem, if you're one of those 150,000 people arriving from all kinds of places, other regions and lands even, you need somewhere where you can change your currency, don't you? And like we would when we travel. And if you come from far away, you don't want to be carrying your lamb all the way or whatever. You want to buy it locally. But the issue here is that whereas this had all legitimately taken place in the markets nearby, Caiaphas, part of the mafia family, had brought it all in-house into the temple. A bit more profitable for them. Controlled a little bit more. And this was a problem because the space that was meant to be for people to come and find God was now being taken over by all of this, including space for people from around and about, from abroad. It's thought that it was quite likely it was in the court of the Gentiles, where the outsiders could come in. And it seems it was an abuse of the poor even as well, because in the other Gospels, the offerings that are highlighted as being for sale were those that the poor people would buy. It talks about the benches of those selling doves. You bought a dove if you couldn't afford a bigger animal. And so even this was a form of oppression of the poor. And Jesus is angry about this. And he quotes Isaiah and Jeremiah as he condemns them. He quotes Isaiah 56, which talks about this house of prayer is supposed to be a place that welcomes outcasts and foreigners, a house of prayer for all nations, it says in Isaiah 56. And then the den of robbers reference is Jeremiah 7, which is really not subtle. We missed a slide there. There it is. It's really not subtle. So I'm sorry if that's a little bit small, but I'm going to read it to you. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and actions and deal with one another justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we're safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Wow, pretty direct. And they would have got the message because they knew the references. Change your ways and your actions, he says. Deal with each other justly. Don't oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. But tragically, they would not recognize the time of God's coming to them. My friend was once in Tel Aviv airport, and he was talking with a Jewish man there about the struggles and the politics of the area and how difficult it all is. And the man he was talking to just sighed and said, we need the Messiah to come. Still waiting for him. But he did come. God with us. God's presence. God came as one of us, came to us. And what does he want? He wants connection. He wants to know us and to be known by us. And Jesus cares deeply about this. Hence the emotion of both tears and anger. Jesus cares about the connection with him as God with us, because we need it. He cares about you knowing him. And he wants you to know his presence in your life. Do you realize that? Are we listening to what Jesus is communicating here? Because this is what we need to hear. If we go home this morning with a head full of various historical facts, but miss this, we've missed the key thing. Because God wants us to know him. He loves you, and he wants to know you. And he knows we need his presence in our lives. So what's our response then? Well, clearly the major part of our response needs to be to say, Jesus, you are the King. Help me. I'm going to follow you. But hopefully it shouldn't just be a kind of begrudging, I suppose I'd better, because, you've made the point, and I suppose I better get with the program. If we really get what this is about and who this king is and his nature and what he really wants for us, it won't be, okay, I suppose I better submit, so much as I've got a king. I've got a hero, a leader who is righteous and good and completely trustworthy and who wants my best. And I want to follow him. Why wouldn't I? He sets me free from my sin and its consequences, my brokenness. He brings me forgiveness. And then with that kind of mindset, living for him as we step confidently into our lives becomes not a restrictive thing, but a freeing and empowering thing. Living obediently for this servant king means I can be confident He's shaping my life. He's got my back. He is there. And that's true through all of the ups and downs of life. In the good times, and maybe especially we know it, when times are tougher than sometimes we could ever have imagined. When struggles seem real, incredibly real. When there's key decisions to be made. Maybe we're unsure of ourselves, full of questions. There's uncertainty. More of our lives are like this more of the time than we care to admit, aren't they? But in the midst of all those things, if you live for this King, you're living knowing he's there, knowing he's with you, knowing he's weaving it all together, or orchestrating our lives in the same way as he was his own here in these verses. And that enables you to live with confidence. Sure, it leaves us with questions, but it also leaves us able to trust, because this King is good. He is righteous, Zechariah, the passage said. He is the King of peace. He's humble. He's victorious. No one's going to knock him off his perch. And we can know and entrust ourselves to him completely with joy and know life that he brings. Now, I often reflect on how when I'm kind of pushing at the boundaries or resistant or disobedient in some way, trying to live it my way, I'm actually not at my happiest. We kind of think we will be, don't we? But that's part of the lie, isn't it? And it's so uncertain. But when does joy come? It's when we know God's presence in our lives, and we know his closeness, and the peace that comes from knowing this King is shepherding us, and actually going his way is the best way. You know, and that's when the joy comes, isn't it? When we get right with him again. This King who came into Jerusalem, who is so committed to you, he would shortly give his life on the cross. We submit ourselves to him. And when we come back to him in that way, it's always a bit of a duh moment, isn't it? As we think, this is how life makes sense. This is how I flourish. We need these moments of reality and reminder. And you know, Easter week is a good time to reflect on this kind of thing and to go through this and to take this reality and this reminder. And communion is a good time for this as we take the bread and the cup shortly to say to Jesus, you are the servant king. You gave your life, you gave your body and blood for me, and I will follow you. You know, this is a time as we have the Lord's Supper together of reminder and refreshment for all of us who love Jesus. But maybe for some of us, this time is also a much-needed reset. Getting our focus back onto King Jesus. For others, it might even be the first time that you've ever quite put this all together in your mind and heart. And it could be an opportunity to say yes, for the first time, really, seriously, to this wonderful servant king, and know the presence he wants to bring for yourself. This is a king who comes in humility and brings God's presence into our lives. Let's just sit quietly for a few moments and pray, talk to God, and then Warwick will come shortly to lead us through communion. Let's have a few moments of silence.